Welcome to our next lecture on what it's like to be a bat. This is one of my favorite papers in philosophy. It's a great paper, it's really fun. I hope you enjoyed reading it as well. So let's recall the notion of reduction. We've talked about it a lot in this class so far. So there are a couple different kinds of reduction. One is intertheoretic reduction. So this concerns the relations between scientific theories, where t is reducible to t prime just in case t is logically derivable from t prime. So an example of this might be something like biology is reducible to chemistry because chemistry is sort of a precursor for biology. Everything biological has a particular kind of chemical makeup. And so any biological explanation should also accord with some kind of chemical explanation which explains its possibility. Likewise, you might think that chemistry reduces to a kind of molecular physics because the same sort of laws of the interaction of molecules that are determined by the laws of physical bodies interacting with one another give us the rules of chemistry. But there's also ontological reduction. So this concerns a kind of distilling of one type of entity into another type of entity. So saying some properties or kind X just is Y. So to say that two things just are the same. For instance, the morning star and the evening star are both Venus. Now the morning star appears to us at dawn, and the evening star appears at dusk, but it turns out it's the same planet. So they share a nature, a being. They're the same thing. The morning star is the evening star is Venus. We can reduce both of those terms to something simpler, the planet itself. So physicalist views of mind, materialist views of mind, commit to a claim about the actual world, which is that it conforms to the condition of being physical. So this is in contrast with our dualists like Descartes, who thought there was such a thing as mental substance and mental properties. The physicalists, like J.J.C. Smart, want to argue to the contrary that the world is just physical and that it runs by physical laws. So more simply, all stuff is physical stuff. And these physicalist theories of mind run into trouble, or will run into trouble, when it comes to consciousness. So Nagel's argument here is that the physicalist attempt at reduction of the mind to other physical stuff is an impossible task, or at least one that is not yet possible. So a couple of these examples of materialist or physicalist views are identity theory, which of course said that for any mental state M, there's a brain state B, and those are equal to one another. Mental states are just brain states. And the reduction here is of an ontological sort, right? That the sort of thing that a mental state is just a brain state. But then functionalism, and computational functionalism is the sort of type that we looked at, is also a kind of reduction. Mental states are the causal functional roles. So here we have theoretical and ontological reduction. This is what Nagel is taking issue with. Nagel says consciousness is what makes the mind-body problem really intractable. Perhaps that is why current discussions of the problem give it little attention, or get it obviously wrong. So shots fired across the bow. What Nagel is saying is that certain features of conscious mental experience, namely the subjectivity of conscious mental experience, the qualitative features from our subjective perspectives, are what make consciousness so hard for any type of complete scientific explanation. And so Nagel is targeting the rush of physicalist theories like computational functionalism and identity theory that were really popular in the 50s through 70s. But as we'll see, his basic worry generalizes to threaten the very possibility of a completely reductive physicalist explanation of mind. So what's so hard about consciousness? Well, Nagel's emphasis is on the subjective qualitative features of experience. For any conscious experience that one may have, there is something that it is like to have that experience, which is the character of the experience as it is experienced by the subject. This is sometimes called a phenomenology. Our phenomenology is just the quality or character of what it's like to experience as and what we do. Nagel generalizes this. He says, whatever variations there may be, an organism has conscious experience just in case there is something it is like to be an organism of that type. So, He gives a definition. Consciousness for an organism. An organism has conscious mental states if and only if there's something that is like to be that organism. So what this does is it excludes really simple organisms like prokaryotes or eukaryotes, right? Like single cell organisms that don't have a character of experience, probably. Now, where the lines between having a phenomenology and not are to be drawn is blurry and very contentious and worth all sorts of interesting philosophy and biology. But at least for the case that Nagel's making, this is what he's saying: is wherever that line is to be, on one side of it there's phenomenology, on the other side there isn't, and where there's phenomenology there's consciousness. So Nagel is interested in the possibility of giving an objective description or explanation of consciousness that transcends the point of view of the subject, but without ignoring those same subjective features. He's asking, what would it take, or is it possible to do a physical reduction of the subjective character of experience to physical explanations? Is that possible? And it's going to turn out he doesn't think so, or at least it's probably not. So can the physicalist give a reductive explanation of consciousness that actually reduces rather than just ignores or eliminates essential features of consciousness? To illustrate the challenge, Nagel chooses an example, which are bats. So bats, Nagel assume, have an experience of what it's like to be whatever they are. And this assumes only that there's something that it's like for a bat to be a bat. And why bats? Well, because bats are close enough to us on the phylogenetic tree as mammals. Their wings are like hands. The bones of bat wings are the same bones that we have, but there's skin that's grown between them. They're very different from bird wings. So the physical structures are similar. The brain structures are roughly similar, though much simpler. And so we can be confident that they do have an experience. But importantly, bats also have a plausibly distinct sensory modality, which is echolocation, that they can have this multimodal experience of what space is like, how to represent space and one's location in space by virtue of sound rather than by virtue of sight. So the information provided by echolocation may be of the same type as that which we acquire by vision or touch. But there's presumably something qualitatively unique about having an echolocatory experience, and thus something different that it's like to be a bat than it is like to be a human. So is there any way that we could possibly understand what it's like to be a bat, given that that is the character of their phenomenological experience, their consciousness, and likewise is inaccessible to us as non-echolocators? So couldn't I just imagine being a bat and having bad experiences? Wouldn't this show me what it would be like to be a bat as a bat behaves? And Nagel urges that this is not the question. We're not interested in can we behave like a bat, but rather can we experience consciously as a bat would or does. And he says, even if I could by gradual degrees be transformed into a bat, nothing in my present constitution, the pre-transformation anamorphs experience, enables me to imagine what the experiences of such a future stage of myself, thus metamorphosed, would look like. The best evidence would come from the experience of bats if only we knew what they were like. So even if you were to transform slowly into a bat, what you are now could not comprehend what you would be at any stage of that transformation. So the problem generalized. Recall for Nagel that any conscious experience of an organism may have the something that's like the phenomenology. So it's this subjective character, this phenomenological quality of experience that we cannot fully understand. We can only form a schematic conception, but not an actual subjective, contains the truth of conception of what it's like to be a bat. And this generalizes to other actual and possible organisms. The problem cases are not exclusive to the exotic, that what it's like to be an unsighted person or a deaf person can be different from the sighted or the not deaf, the hearing people. And these differences in phenomenology are restricted to those who have the sensory capacities as they do. And we don't need to imagine what it's like to be a bat. We just need to imagine what is it like to be anybody else. And we only ever have access to our own subjective experience. Is it thereby possible on the basis of that subjective experience to capture objectively other people's? It seems like there's a growing gap between intention and possibility in this case. So perhaps it's just unsurprising that we're unable to understand what it's like to be a bat, or congenitally deaf or blind, given the significant differences in our sensory systems. But the bat example illustrates the challenge to understanding a subjective point of view in objective terms. Taking the fact of subjectivity, we have a character of experience of phenomenology, and trying to objectify it is in principle undermining of the subjective experience. So the general challenge is that understanding any experience, whether it be a bat or congenitally deaf person or anybody else, with its subjective character from point of view in the objective terms that scientific reductive explanation requires. This doesn't seem possible because the objective term or the objective point of view is one that strips away the subjective. And without the subjective, it does not appear that there can be phenomenology. What is subjective is a necessary condition of the character. So experience, Nagel argues, is an entirely different kind of thing than like the nature of the structures of the brain and sensory system. So the connection with a point of view seems so much closer to us than the sort of zoomed out perspective of how brains work. And it seems so close that the notion of objectively describing experience, which always has a subjective character, may be unintelligible. After all, says Nagel, what would be left of what it's like to be a bat if one removed the viewpoint of the bat? So this leads physicalism into a dilemma. The physicalist seems forced into the following dilemma. Either they can omit the subjective character of experience from the target of explanation and thereby deny that consciousness must involve a point of view, which seems really strange to say that consciousness doesn't have a point of view or a subjective character of experience. There are people who argue this and argue for this position well, but it's a major bullet to bite. And the other half of the dilemma is to simply accept the subjective character of experience as a part of the target of explanation, what's mind, what's consciousness, and admit that the features of the target remain unreduced or unexplained, that our best physical theories just can't capture the subjective nature of experience. And in both cases, the physicalist is biting a pretty big bullet, which Nagel makes to be a really interesting problem for future research and science.